On MASH, they made us laugh in the middle of war. But more than 5 decades later, it's the silence after those laughs that hits the hardest. The 4077th felt like family. Doctors, nurses, and soldiers who helped millions smile through the pain. But after 54 years, time has taken its toll. Some faded from Hollywood, some faced private battles, and some are no longer here. Stay with us, because what happened after the war ended on screen may break your heart. Hawkeye Piierce was played by Alan Alda at the age of 36. Sharp, restless, and always hiding pain behind a joke, Hawkeye became the beating heart of MASH. He was the surgeon cracking wise in the operating room, pulling pranks in the swamp, and still somehow carrying the horror of war in his eyes when the laughs stopped. Currently 90, he is still one of those rare TV legends who feels genuinely alive in people's memory. After MASH, his career moved through acting, writing, directing, science communication, and interviews, but Hawkeye never really left him. He also spoke openly about living with Parkinson's, handling it with the same curiosity and stubborn humor fans always connected with him. Hawkeye was funny, sure, but that was never the whole point. The jokes were armor. Underneath them was a man furious at war, terrified of losing people, and desperate to stay human in a place built to break him. That is why Hawkeye still hits harder than a lot of sitcom characters ever will. Father Francis Mulcahy was played by William Christopher at the age of 39. Gentle, awkward, and quietly brave, in a camp full of loud personalities, Father Mulcahy gave MASH a softer kind of strength. He was not there to out-joke Hawkeye or outrank Potter. He was there to listen, pray, comfort the wounded, and somehow keep faith alive in the middle of madness. William Christopher passed away in 2016 at the age of 84 after lung cancer. His death hit hard for fans who remembered Mulcahy as the calm voice in one of television's most chaotic war zones. Away from the 4077th, he also appeared in Gomer Pyle, USMC, and later worked with his wife on autism awareness after their son was diagnosed. Mulcahy had that quiet goodness you do not always notice until the story needs it. In a show full of sarcasm, fear, and emotional wreckage, he reminded viewers that kindness could still survive there. Not loudly, not perfectly, just steadily, one wounded soldier at a time. Sherman T. Potter was played by Harry Morgan at the age of 60. Tough, fatherly, and wonderfully no-nonsense, Potter walked into MASH like a man who had already seen every army mistake twice. He was not trying to be the cool commander. He was the old cavalry guy who could bark an order, smell nonsense from across the camp, and still care about his people when it really counted. Harry Morgan passed away in 2011 at the age of 96 after complications from pneumonia. His death felt like losing one of television's great old pros. Before Potter, he was already a familiar face from Dragnet, December Bride, and a long film career, but MASH gave him the role that made him feel like everyone's cranky, loyal army granddad. Potter changed the whole temperature of the 4077th. Henry Blake was loose and lovable, but Potter brought discipline without killing the heart of the camp. He could yell, laugh, ride his horse, paint a little, and still somehow make that muddy war zone feel a bit more survivable. Capt. B.J. Honeycutt was played by Mike Farrell at the age of 36. Kind, smart, and hiding his homesickness behind dry little jokes, B.J. brought a different rhythm to the swamp after Trapper left. He was less wild, more grounded, and you could always feel that somewhere in the back of his mind there was a wife and daughter waiting at home. Today, at 87, he is still acting now and then, with a recent rare TV return that made old MASH fans do a double take. His life after the 4077th also moved into producing, public speaking, and activism, especially his long work against the death penalty. BJ was funny, but in a quieter, more bruised way. He did not always explode like Hawkeye. Sometimes he just looked tired in a way that said everything. That made him feel painfully real. The decent guy trying not to let war turn him into someone his family would not recognize. Walter Radar O'Reilly was played by Gary Berghoff at the age of 29. Sweet, nervous, and somehow always knowing what Colonel Blake needed before Blake even said it, Radar became the camp's softest little miracle. With his clipboard, teddy bear, and Iowa innocence, he made the 4077th feel less like an army unit and more like a strange, broken family. Currently 83, he has mostly lived away from regular Hollywood work. After MASH, he appeared on game shows, stage projects, and later focused on art, music, and invention, which honestly fits Radar more than a flashy celebrity life ever would. Radar was the heart you worried about. Everyone else had built some kind of armor around the war, but Radar still looked young enough to be hurt by all of it. When he left, It felt like the camp lost its kid brother, and MASH never sounded quite the same without that nervous voice calling for the colonel. Kelly Yamato was played by Kelly Nakahara at the age of 27. Warm, quick, and quietly tougher than people gave her credit for, Nurse Kelly helped make the 477th feel like a real working hospital, not just a stage for the doctor's jokes. She was often in the background, but she had that steady presence of someone who had seen the blood, the exhaustion, and the nonsense, and kept showing up anyway. Kelly Nakahara passed away in 2020 at the age of 72 after battling cancer. That one hurt because she felt like part of the camp's everyday heartbeat. Beyond MASH, she also appeared in Clue, Growing Pains, and other projects, but later in life she found another lane as a visual artist, which gave fans a softer, more personal side of her story. Kelly was easy to underestimate, and that was kind of the point. In a camp full of loud surgeons and big personalities, she represented the nurses who did the hard work without always getting the big speech. MASH needed people like her to make the place feel human. Charles Winchester was played by David Ogden Stiers at the age of 34. Snobbish, brilliant, and absolutely horrified to be stuck in a muddy war zone, Winchester arrived like someone had dropped a Boston Symphony Hall into an army tent. He was arrogant, yes, but he was also too smart and too wounded to be just another rich guy joke. David Ogden Stiers passed away in 2018 at the age of 75 after battling bladder cancer. His death felt like losing one of television's finest voices, literally and emotionally. Beyond MASH, he became known to younger audiences through voice work in Disney films like Beauty and the Beast, Pocahontas, and Lilo and Stitch, where that elegant voice found a whole new life. Charles could be unbearable, but that made his softer moments hit even harder. When the arrogance cracked, you saw a lonely man trying to protect himself with culture, money, and perfect manners. In the middle of MASH chaos, Winchester gave the show a colder edge, and sometimes, unexpectedly, one of its deepest hearts. Frank Burns was played by Larry Linville at the age of 32. Petty, uptight, and painfully convinced he was the smartest man in the tent, Frank became MASH's perfect little pressure cooker. He was jealous, hypocritical, and usually wrong, but Linville played him with such nervous commitment that even Frank's worst moments were hard to look away from. Larry Linville passed away in 2000, at the age of 60, after complications from cancer and pneumonia. His death came too early for fans. After leaving MASH, Linville kept working in television, stage, and guest roles, but Frank Burns stayed the character people could quote, mock, and strangely remember with affection. Frank was not lovable in the usual way, and honestly that made him useful. He gave Hawkeye and Trapper someone to push against, someone who represented the worst little habits of military ego. MASH needed Frank's foolishness because the show understood something very human. Sometimes the funniest person in the room is the one trying hardest to be important. Igor Straminsky was played by Jeff Maxwell at the age of 25. Tired, practical, and usually stuck serving questionable army food, Igor became one of those background faces that made MASH feel like a real camp. He was not a surgeon, not a commander, and not the guy making the big anti-war speech. He was the poor cook dealing with hungry people, bad supplies, and everyone's complaints. Currently 78, he has stayed closely tied to the world of MASH in a very personal way. Years after the show ended, he co-hosted the MASH Matters podcast, where he revisited stories, memories, and behind-the-scenes moments from the 4077th, with fans who still care about the series like it happened yesterday. Igor was funny because he felt like camp life itself. The food was bad, the hours were worse, and somehow everyone still had to eat. He gave the show one more layer of everyday army misery, the kind that was not dramatic enough for the operating room, but still made the war feel exhausting, absurd, and weirdly human.